Hey everybody, so we're into February now. It's February 1st. The NHL season is quickly coming and going here. We're pretty deep into the year now. Really, we have February and March of regular season hockey left, and then boom, it's April and we're at playoff time. But with February comes the trade deadline, which comes towards the end of this month. And obviously, the trading deadline is one of the biggest events, one of the biggest days of the year in the NHL. There's always a lot of activity, lots of trades going on between teams. Some teams are selling their players that are worth a lot to get future assets, draft picks, prospects, things like that, while other teams who are looking to make Stanley Cup runs are trying to add the perfect player to their lineup to make them go from a good team to a great team. So there's a lot going on around the trade deadline, and it's always a really, really fun day and a really fun time of the year as far as the NHL is concerned. So I wanted to talk about some of the names that are really getting thrown around with the trade deadline coming up. Guys who are most likely to get traded, guys who are the biggest names that are most likely to get traded. And there's been a lot of talk about these guys recently. So let's get right into it. And number one is probably no surprise to anyone because his name has been talked about a ton. From the Philadelphia Flyers, it's Wayne Simmonds. The Flyers are having an abysmal year. Yes, they've won 6 games in a row. They've won 6 games in a row and they're still under 500. They are going nowhere near the playoffs this year. So Wayne Simmonds, really good player for them. Not having a great season this year, but again, the Flyers aren't having a great season. Contract is up at the end of the year. Most likely, he's not going back to the Flyers. 30 years old, power forward type player. Brings a ton of value to any team that trades for him. A team looking to make a run would absolutely kill for a player like Wayne Simmonds, especially come playoff time where the physicality ramps up, the hitting ramps up. It's just guys like him are just such hot commodities in playoff hockey. And you have to have players like that to win in the playoffs. So Simmonds, I think there's a large number of teams who would be making a play for Simmonds. Pretty much any playoff team is going to want to add a guy like Simmonds. But especially those teams that aren't exactly known for their grit in the lineup. Teams like Toronto, teams like Pittsburgh. Although I don't see him going to Pittsburgh just because of the Flyers-Penguins thing. But a team like Toronto, I think, could make a run at Simmonds. A team like Colorado, I think, should make a run at Simmonds. And I did a video on that much earlier in the year. Pretty much any team in the playoffs that's looking to go deep that could really benefit from having a more rugged player in their lineup, I think Simmonds would be a good play for. Maybe the San Jose Sharks. He might be... that's not something I've heard a lot about, but San Jose, they've got some toughness there, they've got some grit there, but not a ton, especially up front. I think Simmonds would be a huge boost to that San Jose lineup. But, he's a guy who's almost guaranteed to get traded. He's going somewhere, it's just a matter of where. Speaking of rugged wingers and guys who would add a lot of value to a team, especially a team looking to add grit into going into the playoffs, Michael Ferland from the Carolina Hurricanes. He is going to be a hot commodity at the deadline as well. Not as good offensively as Wayne Simmonds, but he can score some goals, and he's willing to drop the gloves. He hits like a ton of bricks. Very physical player. Really has played well for the Hurricanes this year. Now, the money that he's demanding his contract's up at the end of this year. The money he wants for his next contract is more than Carolina is going to be willing to pay. So it's looking very likely that he's going to get moved at the deadline. If I'm the Pittsburgh Penguins, this is one of my biggest trade targets at the deadline. I want Michael Furland if I'm the Pittsburgh Penguins. Pittsburgh's a team that can make a run, even though they're in a wild card spot or whatever in the East. All Pittsburgh has to do is make it to the playoffs, and they have a shot of making a deep run. Adding Michael Furland would be a huge, huge boost to that team, who just traded away Jamie Oleksiak, who was their toughest player. So, that again, Toronto, another team I think would benefit from Furland. I think there are a number of teams that Michael Furland would really help out heading into the playoffs, and he's going to come at a cheaper price than Wayne Simmonds because he's not as good of an offensive player. Moving on now, and this player has been talked about all season long. One of the biggest names on the trade market, if he's on the trade market, and he's getting a question mark next to his name, and that's Artemi Panarin. Because we don't know if Artemi Panarin is going to get traded. Columbus might keep him and try and make a run this year, and then risk losing him for nothing in free agency. But Columbus is a good enough team where they could make a run this year. Most of these teams, what these players are coming from, aren't good teams. They're most likely, they're not keeping guys to make a playoff run. Columbus could keep guys to make a playoff run. So we don't know for sure that Panarin's going to get traded, but if he does, he will be the biggest name traded at the deadline. He is a superstar player, a guy who has a chance to get to 90 points. He's just really, really, really good and would be a huge boost to any team in the league. Doesn't matter where he goes, he automatically makes any team in the league a lot better. So we'll see if he gets traded or not, but if he does, it's going to be the absolute blockbuster of the year as far as the trading deadline goes. Next up, defenseman. First defenseman on the list, and it's Cody Ceci from the Ottawa Senators. The Senators, obviously one of the worst teams in the league, nowhere near the playoffs. Ceci is a guy that is likely to get moved. And defensemen are really sought after on the trade market. Teams want to add defensemen, especially right shot defensemen, because there just aren't that many of them. They're a hot commodity. And Cody Ceci probably not going to re-sign with Ottawa. I would say definitely not going to re-sign with Ottawa. So he's an RFA at the end of this year, which that gives a lot more incentive into getting him, because it's not like he's just a rental guy. He's not a guy who you're going to have for not even half a season, a third of a season, and then the playoff run, and then he's gone. He's an RFA. You have exclusive rights to sign him long term, and you can get a deal done and keep him long term. And he's a very, very good player on the back end there. So Ceci likely to get moved at the deadline. Sticking with the defenseman, this one, well, it's not just one. It's any number of guys. It's some right shot defenseman from the Carolina Hurricanes is likely to get moved. Whether it's Justin Falk, whether it's Brett Pesce, whether it's Dougie Hamilton, we don't know who it's going to be, but one of those guys is likely to get moved by Carolina. That's just, right-handed defensemen are so sought after on the market. Somebody's going to give up a big paying price to get one of those right shot guys. I know Pesce has been talked about a lot with Toronto. Toronto did make the move for Jake Muzzin, so maybe they're not interested in that anymore. Maybe they still are. Pesce's a young guy with a bright future ahead of him. Maybe Toronto's still in the market for him. Plenty of other teams will be as well, just like Justin Falk, maybe to an extent Dougie Hamilton. So it's very likely that Carolina moves one of their right shot defensemen. Let's see. Continuing on here, we have Wayne Simmonds, Michael Furland, Artemi Panarin, Cody Ceci, Carolina's right shot defenseman. Who else might get moved at the deadline? I think you're going to see a lot of depth forwards get moved. Not any particular names that I'm thinking off the top of my head, but you're going to see teams gearing up on depth forwards, veteran depth forwards as well. You need guys like that to make playoff runs. Obviously the playoffs are a long, hard grind, very physical. Players get hurt, and it happens. It happens, all the time where you lose a couple of guys out of your lineup, and your depth really gets tested. So look for depth forwards to get moved, guys who may not be in the lineup on their with their new teams night in and night out, but could really come up big as a third or fourth line fill-in come playoff time if someone gets injured, or if you just need to add a little bit of grit to the lineup or something like that. So, any sort of veteran depth forward that's not on a playoff team could get moved to a playoff team, and I think we'll see plenty of those smaller deals as the deadline approaches. Not every team has the cap space to make a big splash grabbing a Simmons or Panarin or Ceci. Some teams need to make smaller moves and just kind of, fill out their lineup and their depth, and I think we're going to see a lot of that, especially with teams that are tight up against the cap. So, so that's, I think, where we're at. Obviously, the biggest names at the deadline are Simmons, Panarin, Ferland, Ceci, maybe even Alex Pietrangelo to an extent, although St. Louis is making a playoff push. The Western Conference has gotten to the point where St. Louis is still in it. None of those middle-of-the-pack teams are really going anywhere, so St. Louis does have a shot at a wild card spot. They're not going to move anybody of importance if they're still fighting for a wild card spot. If they can make the playoffs, they're going to do it, so they're not going to be giving up a guy like Pietrangelo. So I think his name has probably come off the market at this point, unless St. Louis goes on a long losing streak over the next couple of weeks and really buries themselves out of it. But, obviously these are some of the biggest names. There are others out there. And then Carolina, any of those right-handed defensemen could be moved. And obviously depth forwards. Teams are going to be looking to add depth before the playoffs. So we will see how everything plays out. Trade deadline's about 3 weeks away, I believe. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Always is. So like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. Check out offthewallhockey.com. All those links are down in the description below. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.